They left her to die in the storm, not by accident, by choice. While her pack huddled in warmth and safety, Rhea Ashford sat alone in a cabin with walls so thin the wind screamed through the cracks. The weakest, the unwanted, the one they'd all agreed wasn't worth saving. But when something clawed at her door in the middle of that frozen hell, she made a decision that would shatter everything they believed about strength, about power, about who deserved to survive. If you want to see how an outcast became a queen, stay until the end. Like this video, comment what city you're watching from, and let's begin. The cold didn't ask permission. It didn't care if you were strong or weak, worthy or worthless. It came for everyone the same way, silent, patient, absolute. Rhea Ashford had learned that lesson young. She pressed her back against the cabin wall, knees pulled to her chest, breath fogging in the air. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers hours ago. She'd fed it the last of the wood, rationing each piece like it was gold. Now there was nothing left but splinters and hope didn't keep you warm. Outside, the blizzard howled. It wasn't the kind of storm you waited out with hot tea and blankets. This was the kind that buried entire villages, the kind that turned the landscape into a grave. The wind didn't gust. It roared, slamming against the cabin like fists demanding entry. Snow piled against the door in drifts so high she couldn't see the ground anymore. And she was alone. Not stranded, not separated, abandoned. Her pack, the Ashford Wolves of Blackridge territory, had made the choice deliberately. When the storm warnings came, when the elders called for everyone to gather in the main lodge, no one had knocked on her door. No one had checked. No one had cared. Because Rhea was weak. That's what they'd called her since she was old enough to understand the word. Too small, too slow, too soft. In a world where survival meant claws and fangs and the ability to tear through enemies without hesitation, Rhea had always been the one who hesitated. The one who flinched. The one who asked if there was another way. Weakness, they said, was contagious. So they kept their distance. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself, trying to trap what little warmth remained in her body. Her fingers were numb, her lips cracked and bleeding. The threadbare blanket around her shoulders might as well have been tissue paper. The cabin had never been meant for winter habitation. It was a summer outpost, a hunting shack built decades ago and left to rot. The boards were warped and splitting. Wind whistled through gaps in the walls. The roof sagged in the middle, threatening to collapse under the weight of snow. When Rhea had been assigned here 3 months ago, she'd known exactly what it meant. Out of sight, out of mind, out of the way. Alpha Gareth had made it clear during the assignment. He'd stood in the center of the main hall, surrounded by the pack's strongest warriors, and pointed at her with the casual disgust of someone identifying garbage. "You'll take the northern outpost," he'd said. "Supply runs every 2 weeks. Don't expect more." She'd opened her mouth to protest. The northern outpost was a death sentence in winter, but his eyes had frozen the words in her throat. "Do you have a problem with that, Rhea?" The way he said her name, like it tasted rotten. "No, Alpha," she'd whispered. "Good. Because if you're not strong enough to survive out there, then you're not strong enough to survive here either. And we don't waste resources on dead weight." Laughter had rippled through the room. Not cruel, exactly, just indifferent, like she was a joke they'd all heard before. She'd packed her things that night. A single bag of clothes, a hunting knife with a chipped blade, a blanket her mother had given her before she died. That was it. That was everything she owned, everything she was worth to the Blackridge pack. The first month hadn't been terrible. The weather held. She'd managed to hunt a few rabbits, gather enough firewood to keep the cold at bay. The supply runs came as promised, meager rations of dried meat and grain, barely enough to keep her alive, but enough. Then the supply runs stopped. The first missed delivery, she'd convinced herself it was a mistake. Weather delays. Logistical problems. They'd come the next week. They didn't. The second missed delivery, she'd hiked back to the main settlement. It had taken her a full day through knee-deep snow. When she'd arrived, exhausted and freezing, the guards at the gate had looked at her like she was a stranger. "What do you want?" one of them had asked. "I need to speak to the Alpha. The supply runs are for active pack members," the guard had interrupted. "You're on probation. Limited rations." Probation? For what? The guard had shrugged. "Take it up with the Alpha." But Alpha Gareth hadn't been available. Not that day, not the next, not ever. She'd stood outside the main hall for 6 hours in the snow, waiting for an audience that never came. Eventually, someone had brought her a half loaf of stale bread and told her to leave. She'd walked back to the cabin with nothing but that bread and the crushing understanding that they weren't testing her. They were erasing her. By the time the storm warnings came, she'd been surviving on foraged roots and melted snow for 2 weeks. Her body had started to eat itself. Her ribs showed through her shirt. Her hair fell out in clumps. Every morning she woke up a little weaker, a little colder, a little closer to nothing. And when the evacuation order came, when every pack member was called to the main lodge to weather the storm together, her name wasn't on the list. She'd heard the howls in the distance, the signal that everyone was accounted for, everyone was safe, everyone except her. Rhea had sat in this cabin and listened to her pack leave her behind. And the worst part, the part that made her hate herself more than she hated them, was that she wasn't even surprised. "Of course they left you," the voice in her head whispered. "Why would they save someone like you?" She pulled the blanket tighter, even though it did nothing against the cold seeping through the walls. Her body had started to shut down. She could feel it, the numbness spreading from her fingers and toes, creeping inward. Her thoughts moved slow, like syrup. How long until I stop feeling the cold, she wondered. How long until I just stop? She wasn't afraid of dying. Not really. She'd been dying slowly her whole life, starved of respect, of belonging, of the most basic acknowledgement that she mattered. This was just the final act. What she hated most was that no one would care. They'd find her body in the spring, frozen stiff in this miserable shack, and someone would say, "Oh, right, her." And that would be it. No mourning, no loss, just a footnote in a story no one wanted to tell. A gust of wind hit the cabin so hard the walls groaned. Rhea flinched, eyes darting to the ceiling. The boards overhead creaked ominously, bowing under the weight of snow. Dust and ice crystals rained down. If the roof collapsed, that would be the end of it, buried alive in a tomb of ice and timber. She closed her eyes. Maybe that's easier. The wind screamed, the cabin shuddered, and Rhea waited for the end. But then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. Scratching. Her eyes snapped open. It was faint at first, almost swallowed by the wind. But it was there, steady, desperate, clawing at the wood. Not the scrape of a branch, not the rattle of debris. Something alive. Rhea's heart kicked against her ribs. An animal? The scratching intensified, sharp, frantic. Then came a low guttural sound, a whine, broken and pleading. She stared at the door. Every instinct screamed at her to stay still, to stay silent, to let whatever it was pass by. Opening that door meant letting in the cold, and she barely had enough heat to survive as it was. The embers in the hearth were dying. The temperature inside the cabin hovered just above freezing. If she opened that door, the wind would rush in and extinguish what little warmth remained. She'd be dead within the hour. But the whine came again, and this time it sounded desperate. Rhea pushed herself to her feet. Her legs trembled, weak from hunger and cold. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. She had to grab the wall to keep from falling. "Don't be stupid," the voice in her head hissed. "You'll die if you open that door." But she was dying anyway, wasn't she? What difference did it make? She crossed the small cabin in 3 unsteady steps and pressed her ear to the door. The scratching stopped. Then came a thud. Heavy. Final. Something had collapsed. Her hand hovered over the latch. This is insane. You're going to kill yourself for an animal that's probably already dead. But if something out there was dying too, well, at least she wouldn't be alone. She threw the latch and yanked the door open. The wind hit her like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Snow blasted into the cabin, stinging her face, blinding her. The cold was so intense it felt like fire. She gasped, stumbling backward, one arm raised to shield her eyes. For a moment she couldn't see anything, just white, just chaos. Then the wind shifted and she saw them. Wolves. Not one, not 2, dozens. They were scattered across the snow just beyond her doorstep, collapsed in twisted heaps, their dark fur barely visible against the white. Some were still moving, paws twitching, chests heaving with shallow breaths. Others lay completely still, already half buried in snow. Rhea's mind went blank. Wolves. Dying wolves. She counted them quickly, her brain struggling to process what she was seeing. 15. 15 wolves collapsed in the storm. She should have slammed the door, should have locked it and pretended she'd seen nothing. These weren't pups or harmless strays. These were wolves, predators, killers. Even dying, they were dangerous. One bite and she'd bleed out in the snow. But she didn't close the door because she recognized that whine. It was the same sound she'd made, alone in the dark, when no one was listening. The sound of someone who'd given up hope but couldn't quite stop begging for it anyway. She knew that sound. She was that sound. Rhea stepped outside. The cold hit her like a wall. Her bare feet sank into snow up to her ankles, the ice biting into her skin like knives. The wind tore at her clothes, her hair, her skin. She could barely see 3 feet in front of her, but she moved. The nearest wolf was a female, her fur matted with ice and blood. Her chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow bursts. Frostbite had blackened her ears and muzzle. Her eyes were half closed, glazed with pain. Rhea dropped to her knees beside the wolf. "Hey," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Hey, I've got you." The wolf didn't respond, didn't even flinch. Rhea slid her arms beneath the animal's body and pulled. The wolf was heavy, far heavier than Rhea had expected. Easily 100 pounds of dead weight. Her muscles screamed in protest. Her legs buckled. But she didn't stop. She dragged the wolf backward toward the cabin. Snow filled her boots. Her feet went numb. The wind screamed in her ears, drowning out everything else. Step by agonizing step, she hauled the wolf across the threshold. The moment she got the animal inside, she dropped it, gently as she could, and collapsed against the wall, gasping. Her lungs burned. Her vision swam. Every muscle in her body shook. 1 down, 14 to go. She didn't let herself think about it. Didn't let herself consider how impossible this was. She just turned around and went back out into the storm. The second wolf was larger, male. His breathing was so faint she almost thought he was already gone. But when she touched him, his eyes cracked open, gold and glassy, and looked at her. "I'm not leaving you," she said. She didn't know if he understood, didn't know if he even heard her, but she said it anyway. She grabbed him under the forelegs and pulled. He was heavier than the first. Her back screamed. Her arms felt like they were being torn from their sockets. But she pulled. Inch by inch, she dragged him through the snow. When she finally got him inside, she didn't stop to rest. She went back out. The third wolf. Then the fourth. The storm fought her every step. The cold clawed at her skin. Her vision blurred. Her hands went numb. She couldn't feel her feet anymore. Blood dripped from her cracked palms, staining the snow red. But she didn't stop. 5, 6, 7. Her body moved on instinct now, beyond thought, beyond reason. She was a machine made of ice and stubbornness, pulling one wolf after another into the tiny cabin until there was no room left to move. 8, 9, 10. Some of them were stirring now, eyes opening, watching her. She didn't have time to worry about whether they'd attack, didn't have time to second guess. She just kept moving. 11, 12, 13. Her legs gave out on the 14th wolf. She hit the ground hard, face first in the snow. For a moment, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The world spun. "Get up." She didn't know where the voice came from. Maybe it was hers. Maybe it was her mother's. Maybe it was just the stubborn, stupid part of her brain that refused to quit. Get up. She grabbed the wolf by the scruff of its neck and dragged it toward the cabin on her knees. When she finally hauled it over the threshold, she collapsed beside it, gasping for air that wouldn't come. The cabin was packed wall to wall with wolves now, bodies pressed together, breathing shallow and uneven. The door hung open, snow swirling inside. The temperature had dropped. The embers in the hearth were completely dead. She should close the door. She couldn't move. But there was still one more. Rhea turned her head, squinting into the storm. The last wolf lay apart from the others, half buried in snow at the edge of the clearing. And he was massive. Even from a distance, even half dead, she could tell this one was different. His fur was black as midnight, his frame easily twice the size of the others. His shoulders were broad as a bear's. Even unconscious, he radiated power. "Alpha," some instinct whispered. Rhea dragged herself to her feet. Her body screamed at her to stop. Every nerve was on fire. Her muscles had torn, her bones ached. She was pretty sure she'd broken something in her foot, but there was one more. She stumbled through the snow, falling twice before she reached him. Up close, he was even bigger. His paws were the size of her hands. His chest rose and fell so faintly she had to press her ear against his ribs to confirm he was still breathing. I can't do this one. He was too big, too heavy. She had nothing left, but she grabbed him anyway. She hooked her arms under his front legs and pulled. He didn't budge. She pulled harder. Nothing. Tears froze on her cheeks. Her vision blurred. Her body was shutting down. She could feel it, the cold seeping into her bones, the darkness creeping in at the edges. You can't save them all, the voice whispered. You tried. That's more than anyone else would have done. Just go inside, close the door. Let this one go. But she couldn't, because if she left him, he'd die alone. And she knew what that felt like. Rhea planted her feet, locked her arms around the massive wolf's chest, and pulled with everything she had left. Her muscles tore, her bones ground together, blood filled her mouth where she'd bitten through her tongue. But he moved, an inch. She pulled again, another inch. She didn't think, didn't breathe. She just pulled. Step by agonizing step, she dragged the massive wolf through the snow. Her legs gave out twice. She fell, got up, fell again. But she didn't let go. When she finally hauled him over the threshold, the world tilted. She collapsed beside him, staring at the ceiling, her chest heaving. The cabin was packed wall to wall with wolves now, bodies pressed together, breathing shallow and uneven. Snow swirled through the open door. The temperature had dropped below freezing. She should close the door. She couldn't move. Her eyelids drooped. This is how I die, she thought distantly. Surrounded by strangers I tried to save. It wasn't the worst way to go. But just before the darkness took her, she felt something warm press against her side. One of the wolves had shifted closer, curling its body around hers. Then another. And another. Their heat surrounded her, their breath warmed her skin. Slowly, impossibly, the cold began to retreat. Rhea's last conscious thought was a simple one. I'm not alone. Then the darkness swallowed her whole. But when she woke, the storm was still raging, but the cabin was warm. Rhea opened her eyes slowly, her vision swimming. Everything hurt. Not the sharp pain of injury, the deep, bone-level ache of a body that had been pushed far past its limits. Her hands were wrapped in dried blood, her feet were swollen and possibly frostbitten. Her ribs screamed with every breath. But she was warm. The wolves were pressed around her in a living barrier, their bodies radiating heat. Some were still unconscious. Others had lifted their heads, watching her with wary golden eyes. She sat up slowly, wincing. They didn't move, didn't growl, didn't bare their teeth. They just watched. One of the smaller wolves, a lean gray female with intelligent eyes, lifted her head and let out a soft chuff. Not aggressive, almost grateful. Rhea's throat tightened. They're thanking me. She glanced around the cabin. All 15 wolves were inside. All 15 were breathing. Some were in bad shape, frostbite, injuries, hypothermia, but they were alive. I saved them. I actually saved them. The realization hit her like a punch to the chest. She'd done something no one thought she could do. Something she hadn't thought she could do. The door was still open, snow piled halfway up the frame. The storm showed no signs of stopping. If anything, it had gotten worse. The wind howled like a living thing, battering the cabin walls. But inside this cabin, 15 wolves lay alive because of her. Rhea looked down at her hands. They were torn and bloody, shaking with exhaustion. Her whole body trembled. She was running on nothing but fumes and stubbornness. But for the first time in her life, she felt something she'd never felt before. Strength, not the kind that came from claws or fangs, the kind that came from refusing to give up. She pulled herself to her feet, legs wobbling like a newborn fawn's. The wolves watched her, waiting. All right, she rasped, her voice barely a whisper. Let's keep you alive. She turned to face the door. Snow continued to pour through the opening, the temperature dropping by the second. If she didn't close it soon, all her effort would be for nothing. Rhea stumbled forward, grabbed the door, and threw her weight against it. The wind fought back. She gritted her teeth and pushed harder. Inch by inch, the door swung closed. When the latch finally clicked into place, the howling wind became muffled. The temperature inside the cabin stopped dropping. Rhea turned back to the wolves, breathing hard. "Okay," she said. "Fire." The hearth was completely dead, not even a spark remained, but she had to get it going again. Without heat, the wolves, and she, wouldn't last the night. She searched the cabin desperately. There had to be something she could burn. Anything. The furniture was minimal. A broken chair, a small table. She grabbed the chair and smashed it against the floor. The wood splintered. She gathered the pieces and stacked them in the hearth. Now she needed a spark. She searched her pockets. Nothing. The cabin had no matches, no flint. Then she remembered the knife. She pulled the chipped hunting blade from her belt and searched the cabin for a stone. Found one near the hearth, a piece of flint embedded in the mortar. She worked it loose with shaking hands. Then she knelt by the hearth, positioned the knife against the flint, and struck. Nothing. She struck again. A spark flashed, then died. Again. Again. On the seventh try, a spark caught the dry wood shavings she'd scraped from the chair. A flame flickered to life. Rhea fed it carefully, adding splinters one at a time until a proper fire blazed in the hearth. Heat began to spread through the cabin. The wolves stirred, shifting closer to the warmth. Rhea sat back on her heels, watching the flames. We're alive, for now. But survival wasn't just about warmth. They needed food, water, medicine. She had none of those things. Her own supplies had run out days ago. There was nothing in the cabin but a few frozen roots she'd foraged weeks back and some questionable jerky that might have been edible once. The wolves would need meat, fresh meat, and there was no way she could hunt in this storm. One problem at a time, she told herself. First, she needed to assess their injuries. Rhea moved through the cabin slowly, checking each wolf. Most were suffering from hypothermia and exhaustion. A few had frostbite, blackened ears, damaged paws. One had a gash along its ribs, probably from falling on ice. She tore strips from her blanket and used them as bandages, wrapping the worst of the wounds as best she could. It wasn't much, but it was something. The wolves let her work. Some watched her warily. Others had already fallen back asleep, trusting her completely. That trust terrified her. What if I can't save them? What if they all die anyway? But she pushed the thoughts aside and kept working. When she reached the massive black wolf, the one she'd dragged in last, she paused. He was still unconscious. His breathing was stronger now, more regular, but he hadn't stirred. She knelt beside him and checked him over carefully. No obvious injuries, no frostbite, just exhaustion. But even unconscious, he was intimidating. Power radiated from him like heat from the fire. His muscles were corded with strength. His claws were as long as her fingers. "Who are you?" she wondered. She rested a hand on his chest, feeling the steady thump of his heartbeat. "Just stay alive," she thought. "All of you, please." The storm raged on outside, but inside the cabin, surrounded by wolves who should have been enemies, Rhea Ashford sat and tended to the broken. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she mattered. Not because someone told her she did, but because she'd chosen to act like it. The storm didn't break for 3 days. Rhea learned to measure time by the wolves' breathing, the slow rise and fall of their chests, the way their ears twitched in sleep, the gradual return of strength to their limbs. She learned other things too, like how little food she actually had. The frozen roots lasted half a day. The questionable jerky another few hours after that. By the second morning, her stomach had stopped growling and started cramping, a sign her body was beginning to consume itself again. But the wolves needed more than she did. She rationed what little remained, breaking the last strips of dried meat into 15 portions so small they barely counted as food. She placed them near each wolf's muzzle. Some ate, others were still too weak. The gray female, the one who'd chuffed at her, managed to lift her head and take the offering from Rhea's hand. Her tongue was rough and warm against Rhea's palm. "Good girl," Rhea whispered. "You're doing great." The wolf's tail gave a weak thump against the floor. It was the smallest gesture, but it made Rhea's chest ache in a way she didn't expect. By the third day, the food was gone entirely. Rhea sat with her back against the wall, arms wrapped around her knees, trying not to think about how hungry she was. The fire had burned through the last of the furniture. She'd fed it everything she could, the table, the remaining chair, even the wooden frame of the bed. Now all that remained was the floor itself, and she wasn't desperate enough to start tearing that up. Not yet. The wolves were restless. They could sense the lack of food. Some had started to pace, slow, limping circuits around the cabin. Others watched her with those unsettling golden eyes, waiting for her to do something. But what? The storm was still raging outside. She couldn't hunt, couldn't leave, could barely keep the fire going. We're going to starve, she thought, all of us. She'd saved them from freezing only to watch them die slowly of hunger. The massive black wolf, the one she'd dragged in last, still hadn't woken. He breathed, his heart beat strong and steady, but his eyes remained closed, his body unmoving. Rhea checked on him constantly. She didn't know why. Maybe because he was the hardest one to save. Maybe because something about him felt important. She knelt beside him now, pressing her ear to his chest. Thump, 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 thump. Still alive. "Come on," she murmured. "Wake up. I didn't drag your heavy self through a blizzard just so you could sleep through the whole thing." His ear twitched. Rhea froze. Had he heard her? She waited, barely breathing, but he didn't move again. She sat back on her heels, frustration boiling in her chest. She was so tired, so hungry, so far past the limits of what her body could handle that she felt like a ghost, transparent and weightless, held together by nothing but stubbornness. Maybe I should just lie down, she thought, close my eyes, let it end. But then the gray female limped over and pressed her nose against Rhea's hand. Rhea looked down at the wolf. The animal's eyes were clear now, alert, and in them Rhea saw something that made her throat tighten. Trust. This wolf trusted her. They all did. They were waiting for her to save them again. But I don't know how. The wind howled, the walls shook, and Rhea made a decision. "I'm going out," she said aloud. The wolves stared at her. I know it's insane, but if I don't find food, we're all dead anyway." She pushed herself to her feet, legs shaking. The gray female whined, a low, worried sound. "I'll be fast," Rhea promised. She pulled on every piece of clothing she owned, 2 shirts, a threadbare coat, a scarf her mother had knitted. It wouldn't be enough. The cold outside would kill her in minutes, but doing nothing would kill her slower. She wrapped her hands in strips of cloth torn from the blanket, then grabbed her hunting knife and headed for the door. The moment she opened it, the wind tried to rip it from her hands. Snow blasted into the cabin. The wolves scrambled back, pressing against the far wall. Rhea shoved her way outside and slammed the door behind her. The cold hit like a sledgehammer. She couldn't breathe, couldn't see. The wind was so loud it drowned out thought. Snow stung her face like needles. But she moved. She had no plan, no strategy. She just stumbled forward into the white chaos, one hand on the cabin wall to keep from getting lost. The forest was close. She knew that much. If she could reach the tree line, there might be shelter. Maybe animal tracks. Maybe something she could kill. Maybe you'll just die out here and no one will ever find your body. She pushed the thought away and kept moving. The wind tried to knock her down. She fell twice, got up both times. Her feet went numb. Her lungs burned. Ice formed on her eyelashes. But she reached the trees. The moment she stepped into the forest, the wind lessened. The snow still fell, but the trees blocked the worst of it. She could breathe again. Rhea leaned against a trunk, gasping. Okay, food. Find food. She scanned the area looking for tracks, anything that might indicate prey. At first she saw nothing but white. Then, there, rabbit tracks. Fresh, leading deeper into the forest. Rhea's heart kicked. She followed them, moving as quietly as she could. The tracks led to a small hollow beneath an overhanging rock. She crept closer, knife in hand. And there it was. A rabbit, huddled in the snow, too cold to run. Rhea didn't hesitate. She lunged, grabbed the animal, and drove the knife home. It was over in seconds. She knelt in the snow, holding the limp body, breathing hard. 1 rabbit, for 15 wolves and me. It wasn't enough. Not even close. But it was something. She tucked the rabbit inside her coat and kept searching. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost meaning in the storm. She found 2 more rabbits, then a squirrel. Then nothing. Her body was shutting down. She couldn't feel her hands anymore. Her vision blurred. She stumbled more than she walked. Go back. You have to go back. But she didn't know which way back was. She turned in a circle, panic rising. The trees all looked the same. The snow had covered her tracks. "You're lost." She spun again, searching for anything familiar. Nothing. "You're going to die out here." Her legs gave out. She collapsed in the snow, clutching the animals to her chest. "I'm sorry," she thought. "I tried." But then she heard it. A howl, faint, distant, but unmistakable. The wolves. They were calling her back. Rhea lifted her head, listening. Another howl. Closer this time. She forced herself to her feet and stumbled toward the sound. The howls continued, guiding her through the white. One foot in front of the other. Don't stop. Don't think. Just move. And then she saw it. The cabin. She nearly sobbed with relief. She staggered to the door and fell against it, scrabbling for the latch. It opened, and she tumbled inside. The heat hit her like a wall. The wolves surged forward, surrounding her, their breath warm against her frozen skin. Rhea lay on the floor, clutching the dead animals, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. The gray female licked her face. "I got food," Rhea whispered. "Not much, but something." She forced herself to sit up. Her hands were so numb she could barely grip the knife, but she managed to skin and butcher the animals. She divided the meat into portions, most of it going to the wolves, a tiny piece for herself. The wolves devoured their shares in seconds. It wouldn't last. They'd be hungry again by morning, but for now, they were alive. Rhea chewed her portion slowly, trying to make it last. The meat was tough and gamey, but it was the best thing she'd ever tasted. When she finished, she crawled to the fire and collapsed beside it. The gray female curled up next to her. Then another wolf, and another. They formed a living blanket around her, sharing their warmth. Rhea closed her eyes. We survived another day. Welcome. On the fourth day, the massive black wolf woke up. Rhea was checking the other wolves' injuries when she heard a low growl behind her. She turned slowly. The black wolf was sitting upright, watching her with eyes that gleamed like molten gold. He was even bigger awake, his shoulders nearly level with her chest. His gaze was sharp, intelligent, and utterly focused on her. Rhea's breath caught. "Hey," she said softly. "You're awake." The wolf didn't move, didn't blink. "I'm Rhea," she continued, keeping her voice calm. "I pulled you out of the storm. You and the others." Still nothing. "Are you okay?" The wolf tilted his head slightly, studying her. Then he stood. Rhea took an involuntary step back. He was huge, easily the size of a small bear. His fur was glossy and black, unmarked by scars or injury. Power radiated from him in waves. "Alpha," her instincts screamed. The wolf took a step toward her. Rhea's hand moved to her knife. The gray female stepped between them, placing herself in front of Rhea. She let out a warning growl. The black wolf stopped. He looked at the gray female, then at Rhea, then at the other wolves, all of whom were watching the exchange with tense attention. Slowly, deliberately, the black wolf lowered his head. It was a gesture of respect, acknowledgement. Rhea wasn't sure, but the tension in the room eased. The gray female backed down, returning to Rhea's side. The black wolf turned and moved to the far corner of the cabin, where he settled onto the floor and continued to watch Rhea with those unsettling eyes. Rhea let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. What the hell just happened? Lol. The storm finally broke on the fifth day. Rhea woke to silence. Not the howling wind, not the rattle of the cabin walls. Just silence. She sat up slowly, wincing at the ache in her muscles. Sunlight streamed through the cracks in the walls. Actual sunlight. Rhea stumbled to the door and opened it. The world outside was transformed. Snow covered everything in a blanket of white so bright it hurt to look at. The sky was clear and blue. The air was still, beautiful, and deadly cold. But the storm was over. The wolves stirred behind her, moving to the doorway to see. "We made it," Rhea whispered. "We actually made it." The gray female pressed against her leg, tail wagging slowly. Rhea reached down and scratched behind the wolf's ears. For the first time in days, she let herself smile. But the relief was short-lived, because in the distance, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Howls. Not the wolves in her cabin, other wolves. Her pack. They were coming. Rhea recognized the pattern of the howls. It was a hunting call, the signal her pack used when tracking prey. But they weren't hunting animals. They were hunting her. Or rather, they were checking to see if she'd survived. And when they found her alive, with 15 strange wolves, they weren't going to be happy. "Get back inside," Rhea told the wolves. "Now!" Most of them obeyed, retreating into the cabin. But the black wolf remained in the doorway, watching the forest. "You too," Rhea said. "Please." He didn't move. The howls grew closer. Rhea's heart hammered. She should run, should hide, should do something. But there was nowhere to go. Within minutes, figures emerged from the tree line. 5 wolves, then 10, then 20. Her pack. They moved as a unit, disciplined and dangerous. At the front was Alpha Gareth, a massive gray wolf with scars crossing his muzzle. His eyes locked onto Rhea, then onto the black wolf standing beside her. Gareth's lips peeled back, revealing teeth like daggers. The black wolf didn't flinch. Slowly, the pack spread out, surrounding the cabin, trapping her. And then Gareth shifted. The transformation was quick, bones cracking, fur receding, until a man stood where the wolf had been. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with graying hair and a face like carved stone. "Rhea," he said, his voice cold. "You're alive." "Surprised?" she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Honestly, yes." His gaze swept over the cabin, taking in the 15 wolves watching from inside. "And you've brought guests." "They were dying. I saved them." "You saved them." Gareth laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "And here I thought you couldn't even save yourself." The other pack members shifted, some into human form, others remaining wolves. All of them watched her with expressions ranging from contempt to curiosity. "Who are they?" Gareth demanded. "I don't know," Rhea admitted. "They were caught in the storm." "And you just let them in? Into pack territory?" "They were dying." "So?" Gareth stepped closer. "That's not your problem. That's not our problem. You should have let nature take its course." "They're alive because of me," Rhea said, her voice rising. "I saved them." "You endangered us," Gareth snarled. "You brought unknown wolves into our territory. You used our resources." "What resources?" Rhea shouted. "You left me here to die. You didn't send supplies. You didn't check on me. You abandoned me." "Because you're weak," Gareth said flatly, "and weakness has no place in this pack." The words hit like a physical blow, but Rhea didn't back down. "I survived," she said. "I saved 15 lives. That's not weakness." "That's stupidity," Gareth replied. "And it ends now. These wolves leave today, or we kill them." The black wolf growled. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate through the ground, deep, resonant, dangerous. Gareth's eyes narrowed. "What the hell is that thing?" "He's under my protection," Rhea said, stepping in front of the black wolf. Gareth stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "Your protection? Rhea, you're not even a full pack member. You have no authority here." "Then give me some," Rhea said. The words were out before she could stop them. Gareth blinked. "What? You said I'm weak. Fine, let me prove I'm not." Rhea's heart pounded, but she forced herself to stand tall. "I challenge you, for rank, for recognition, for the right to protect these wolves." Silence. The entire pack stared at her. Then Gareth started laughing. "You? Challenge me?" He shook his head. "Rhea, you can barely shift. You've never won a fight in your life. This is pathetic." "Then it should be an easy win for you," Rhea shot back. Gareth's laughter died. His eyes went cold. "You want a challenge? Fine." He stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "But when I beat you, and I will, these wolves die, and you get exiled, permanently." Rhea's stomach dropped, but she nodded. "Deal." Behind her, the black wolf shifted, and when Rhea glanced back, she saw something in his golden eyes that looked almost like approval. Gareth grinned. "Let's get this over with." He shifted back into wolf form and lunged. Rhea didn't have time to think. Gareth's wolf form hit her like a freight train, knocking her flat into the snow. Pain exploded across her ribs. The air punched out of her lungs. She tasted blood. The pack circled them, watching, waiting. Some had shifted back to human form to get a better view. Others remained wolves, hackles raised, teeth bared. No one was going to help her. Rhea rolled to the side just as Gareth's jaws snapped where her throat had been. She scrambled to her feet, gasping. He was toying with her. She could see it in the lazy way he prowled, the casual flick of his tail. This wasn't a fight to him. It was a demonstration. "You're going to die," the voice in her head whispered. "You can't beat him. You never could." Gareth lunged again. This time Rhea managed to dodge, throwing herself backward. Her feet slipped on ice. She went down hard, cracking her head against frozen ground. Stars burst across her vision. Gareth stood over her, lips peeled back in what looked like a grin. "Shift," someone in the crowd called. "At least make it interesting." But Rhea couldn't shift. She'd never been able to, not fully. Something in her had always been broken. Her wolf form incomplete, weak, more liability than asset. The few times she'd tried, the transformation had left her stuck halfway, in agony, until her body gave up and forced her back to human. Gareth knew this. Everyone knew this. That's why they were laughing. He lowered his head, teeth inches from her face. "Last chance," he growled, the words distorted but understandable in his wolf form. "Yield." Rhea spat blood. "No." Gareth's eyes flashed. "Stupid girl!" He reared back, preparing for the killing blow, and then the black wolf moved. It happened so fast Rhea almost missed it. One moment the black wolf was standing in the cabin doorway. The next, he was between her and Gareth, moving with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for something that size. Gareth stumbled back, shocked. The black wolf didn't attack. He just stood there, planted like a wall between them, staring Gareth down with those molten gold eyes. The clearing went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Gareth's ears flattened. "Move." The black wolf didn't budge. "I said move!" Gareth's voice rose to a snarl. "This is pack business. Stay out of it!" Still nothing. Gareth's patience snapped. He lunged at the black wolf, jaws wide. The black wolf caught him midair. It wasn't a fight. It was a lesson. In one fluid motion, the black wolf twisted, using Gareth's momentum against him, and slammed the alpha into the ground so hard the impact cratered the snow. Gareth yelped, a sound of pure shock, and tried to scramble away. The black wolf pinned him with one massive paw on his neck. The pack erupted into chaos. Wolves charged forward. Others shifted frantically between forms. Someone shouted orders that no one followed, but the black wolf didn't move. He stood over Gareth, utterly calm, and waited. "What the hell?" one of the pack members started, and then the black wolf began to shift. Rhea had seen transformations before. Everyone in the pack could shift. It was as natural as breathing, painful sometimes, but quick. This was different. The air around the black wolf seemed to shimmer. His form blurred, expanded, contracted, light bent wrong. Rhea's eyes watered, trying to track it. When it was over, a man stood where the wolf had been. Not just any man. He was tall, easily 6.5 feet, with broad shoulders and a frame built from muscle and violence. His hair was black as his wolf form, cut short. His face was all sharp angles and hard lines, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from stone. Scars traced his arms and chest, pale against tanned skin. But it was his eyes that made Rhea's breath stop. Gold, burning, ancient, the eyes of something far older and far more dangerous than any wolf she'd ever met. He looked down at Gareth, who was still pinned beneath him, human now too, gasping for air. "You," the man said, his voice deep and resonant, "will not touch her again." Gareth's face had gone white. Who are you?" The man smiled. It wasn't friendly. "Kael Draven," he said, "Alpha King of the Northern Territories." The clearing went dead silent. Rhea's brain stuttered. Alpha King. Those weren't just words. That was a title. The ruler of every pack in the northern lands. The wolf all other wolves answered to. A legend, a nightmare, a force of nature wrapped in flesh, and she'd dragged him out of a snowstorm. "That's impossible," Gareth breathed. "The Alpha King wouldn't... He doesn't..." "Doesn't what?" Kael's voice was soft, dangerous. "Travel? Hunt? Get caught in storms?" He leaned down, putting more weight on Gareth's chest. "Or maybe you thought I was a myth." I mean... Gareth was stammering now, all his earlier arrogance gone. Forgive me, my king. I didn't recognize. You left her to die, Kale interrupted. Gareth froze. This woman saved my life. Saved the lives of my council members. Kale gestured to the other wolves still gathered in the cabin doorway. Rhea realized with a jolt that they were watching this with the same intense focus. These weren't random wolves. They were his people, his inner circle. We were traveling in secret when the storm hit. We would have died if not for her. I didn't know, Gareth said quickly. If I had known, you would have what? Treated her like she mattered? Kale's eyes were ice. She told me everything, how you exiled her to a death trap, how you cut off her supplies, how you left her here to freeze while the rest of your pack sheltered together. She's weak, Gareth protested. She can't even shift properly. She's a liability. She saved 15 lives while starving and freezing herself. Kale's voice cut like a blade. What have you done lately? Gareth opened his mouth, closed it. No words came. Kale straightened, releasing him. Gareth scrambled backward, coughing. The Alpha King turned to face the rest of the pack. They all took an involuntary step back. I am invoking the right of judgment, Kale announced. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Rhea had heard of the right of judgment. It was ancient law, something from the old days when the Alpha King actually ruled with absolute authority. It meant Kyle could override any pack's internal decisions, strip ranks, exile members, even execute. It hadn't been used in decades. You can't, Gareth started. I can, Kale said flatly. And I am. This woman, he gestured to Rhea, is under my direct protection. Anyone who harms her answers to me, personally. The threat hung in the air like a blade. Gareth's face twisted. She challenged me. Pack law. Your pack law is garbage, Kyle interrupted. But fine. You want to finish the challenge? Let's finish it. He looked at Rhea. She was still on the ground staring up at him with wide eyes. Her mind was reeling. This didn't make sense. None of this made sense. Can you stand? Kale asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. Rhea nodded and pushed herself to her feet. Her ribs screamed in protest. Her head throbbed. But she stood. Kale studied her for a moment. Then he turned back to Gareth. Here's how this works, he said. Rhea issued a challenge for rank and recognition. You accepted. But you tried to kill her instead of giving her a fair fight. She can't shift, Gareth protested. How is that fair? Exactly, Kale agreed. How is it fair to force a fight where one side is crippled by biology? Sounds like you rigged the game. Gareth's jaw worked. That's not... So we're changing the rules, Kale continued. Human form only. No shifting, no claws, no teeth, just skill. Gareth went pale. You can't. I'm the Alpha King, Kale said softly. I can do whatever I want. He glanced at Rhea. Can you fight? Rhea's mouth was dry. I don't know. Honest answer. Kale almost smiled. But you survived a blizzard and saved 15 wolves while your pack left you for dead. I think you're tougher than you realize. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. I can end it right now. Exile him. Disband this pack. Give you sanctuary in my territory. Rhea's heart hammered. It was tempting, so tempting, but if she let him fight her battles, nothing would change. She'd still be the weak one, the one who needed saving. No, she said. I finished this. Kale's eyes searched hers. Then he nodded. All right, but not alone. He turned to the gray female wolf, the one who'd been protecting Rhea since the beginning. Sarah, he said. Shift. The gray wolf's form blurred and a woman appeared. She was lean and sharp-featured, with gray-streaked dark hair and eyes like flint. She looked at Kyle, then at Rhea, and smiled. About time someone stood up to this bastard, she said. Train her, Kale ordered. She's got 5 minutes. Sarah's smile widened. I can work with that. 5 minutes wasn't enough time to learn how to fight, but it was enough time to learn how to survive one. Sarah dragged Rhea behind the cabin out of sight of the pack. Listen, she said, gripping Rhea's shoulders. You're not going to win on strength. He's bigger, heavier, and he's been fighting his whole life. Great pep talk, Rhea muttered. Shut up and listen. Sarah's eyes were intense. You win by making him angry. Angry people make mistakes, use his size against him. Stay mobile. Don't let him pin you. And for the love of everything, protect your head. That's it? That's the plan? You got a better one? Rhea didn't. Sarah grabbed a stick and drew a quick diagram in the snow. He's going to come at you hard and fast, trying to end it quick. Let him. Dodge. Make him overextend. Then go for weak points. Throat, knees, eyes. I can't. You pulled 15 dying wolves out of a storm, Sarah cut her off. You can do this. Rhea's hands were shaking. What if I can't? Sarah gripped her face, forcing eye contact. Then you go down fighting, but you don't quit. You hear me? You don't quit. Rhea nodded. Good. Sarah released her. Now let's go make that asshole regret ever meeting you. The fight was held in the clearing in front of the cabin. The pack formed a circle. No one spoke. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Gareth stood on one side, stripped to the waist, fists clenched. He'd removed his boots, bare feet gripped the snow better. His expression was murderous. Rhea stood opposite him, wearing every layer she owned because she couldn't afford to feel the cold on top of everything else. Her knife was gone. Kyle had confiscated it to keep things even. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Kyle stood at the circle's edge, arms crossed. Rules are simple. Fight until one yields or can't continue. No killing blows, no shifting. Break the rules, you answer to me. He looked at both of them. Understood? Gareth nodded curtly. Rhea managed a shaky, yes. Begin. Gareth charged immediately. Rhea dodged left, just like Sarah had taught her. Gareth's fist whiffed past her head, close enough that she felt the air move. She stumbled, caught herself, kept moving. Gareth spun, faster than she expected, and his backhand caught her across the jaw. Pain exploded. Her vision blurred. She tasted blood. The crowd murmured. Stay on your feet, Sarah shouted. Rhea staggered but didn't go down. She raised her fist, trying to remember anything Sarah had taught her. Gareth came at her again. This time she tried to block. His fist slammed into her forearm with enough force to crack bone. She gasped, cradling her arm. Pathetic, Gareth spat. Just yield. No. She lunged at him, wild and clumsy. He caught her easily, twisted, and threw her to the ground. The impact knocked the wind out of her. Gareth loomed over her. Stay down. Rhea rolled to the side and forced herself up. Her entire body screamed. Her left arm hung useless. Her vision swam, but she stood. Why are you doing this? Gareth demanded. You can't win. Don't care, Rhea gasped. You're going to die. Better than living as nothing. Something flickered in Gareth's eyes. Surprise? Respect? It didn't matter. He came at her again. This time Rhea didn't dodge. She stepped into the attack inside his reach and drove her good elbow up into his throat. It wasn't a perfect hit. It wasn't even a good hit, but it connected. Gareth choked, stumbling back. The crowd gasped. Rhea pressed forward, clumsy and desperate. She swung at his face. He blocked. She kicked at his knee. He sidestepped. She threw herself at him, all her weight behind it. They went down together, rolling in the snow. Gareth was stronger. He got on top, pinning her. His hands found her throat. Enough, he snarled. Rhea couldn't breathe. Black spots danced across her vision. Her lungs burned. She stopped fighting his hands. Instead, she jammed her thumb into his eye. Gareth screamed and reared back. Rhea sucked in air and kicked him in the stomach as hard as she could. He rolled off her, clutching his face. She scrambled to her feet, swaying. Stay down, she wheezed. Gareth looked up at her, one eye streaming tears. Blood ran from his nose where she'd headbutted him at some point. She didn't even remember doing that. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then Gareth started laughing. It was a harsh, bitter sound. You're tougher than I thought, he admitted. Yield, Rhea said. No. He lunged. But he was tired now, sloppier. And Rhea was running on nothing but adrenaline and spite. She sidestepped his charge, grabbed his arm as he passed, and used his momentum to send him crashing into the cabin wall. The impact shook the whole structure. Gareth slumped, dazed. Rhea grabbed a handful of his hair and yanked his head back, exposing his throat. Yield, she said again. Gareth's eyes met hers. He saw something there that made him go still. I yield, he rasped. The words echoed in the sudden silence. Rhea released him and stepped back, legs shaking so badly she nearly collapsed. Kale stepped into the circle. Winner, Rhea Ashford. The crowd erupted, some cheering, others protesting. Rhea couldn't process any of it. Her vision tunneled. The world tilted. Sarah caught her before she hit the ground. "I've got you," Sarah murmured. "You did it. You actually did it." Rhea tried to respond, but darkness swallowed her whole. When she woke, she was inside the cabin. The fire crackled. Someone had bandaged her arm and wrapped her ribs. Her face felt like one giant bruise. Kale sat against the far wall, watching her with those unnerving gold eyes. "You're awake," he said. Rhea tried to sit up. Pain lanced through her ribs. She gasped and fell back. "Don't move," Kale ordered. "You cracked 3 ribs, broke your arm, and gave yourself a concussion. Sarah says you're lucky to be alive." Did I actually win?" Rhea's voice was hoarse. "You did. What happens now?" Kale was quiet for a moment. Then he stood and crossed to her, kneeling beside the makeshift bed. "Now," he said, "we need to talk. About what you saw. About who I am. About what this means." Rhea's stomach sank. "You're going to make me keep it secret." "No." Kyle shook his head. "I'm going to offer you a choice." "What kind of choice?" "Come with me, to this capital. Let me bring your case before the High Council. We'll put Gareth on trial for negligence and abuse of power. Make sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else." Rhea stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because you saved my life," Kyle said simply. "And because you're exactly the kind of person this world needs more of. Someone who doesn't give up, who fights for what's right even when it costs them everything." "I'm weak," Rhea whispered. "I can't even shift properly." "You survived a blizzard, saved 15 lives, and beat an alpha twice your size in single combat," Kyle countered. "That's not weakness. That's strength most people will never have." Tears pricked Rhea's eyes. "What if they don't believe me? What if they side with him?" "Then we make them believe," Kyle said. "Together." He offered his hand. Rhea looked at it, at him, at the impossible choice he was giving her. She could stay here, go back to her small, quiet, invisible life. Hope Gareth's humiliation made him merciful. Or she could stand up, fight back, risk everything for the chance to change something bigger than herself. Her hand was shaking when she reached out, but she took his. "Together," she agreed. Kyle smiled, a real smile this time, warm and genuine. "Good. Because we leave tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Rhea's eyes widened. "But I can barely walk, which is why Sarah's going to carry you," Kale said, "in wolf form. It's a 3-day journey to the capital. We need to move before Gareth has time to spin this story his way." "He wouldn't." "He absolutely would," Kale interrupted. "Alphas like him? They don't accept defeat. They rewrite it. By the time we get back, he'll have convinced half this pack that you cheated, that I threatened him, that the whole thing was a setup." Rhea's chest tightened. "Then what's the point? If he's just going to lie, the point," Kale said, leaning closer, "is that lies only work when no one challenges them. You challenged him today. Tomorrow, we challenge the whole system." Outside, wolves howled, Gareth's pack calling to each other in the dark. They sounded angry. Rhea looked at Kyle. "What if this makes things worse?" "It will," Kale admitted. "At first. Change always does. But you didn't save 15 lives just to go back to being invisible." He was right. She knew he was right, but that didn't make the fear any smaller. They left at dawn. Rhea was strapped to Sarah's back in wolf form, wrapped in blankets and barely conscious from the pain medication Kyle's healer had given her. The world blurred past in streaks of white and green. Behind them, Gareth's pack watched from the tree line. No one tried to stop them, but Rhea saw the looks, the anger, the promises of retribution. "You've made enemies," a voice whispered, "powerful ones." Kyle ran beside them in wolf form, massive and black, moving with deadly grace. The rest of his council flanked them, forming a protective barrier. They traveled in silence, pushing hard through the snow. By nightfall, they were miles from Blackridge territory. They made camp in a sheltered valley. Kale shifted back to human and helped Sarah get Rhea settled near the fire. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Everything hurts," Rhea admitted. "Good. Pain means you're alive." "Comforting." Kale smiled slightly. Then his expression grew serious. "Tomorrow we cross into neutral territory. Once we're there, Gareth can't touch you. But until then, we're vulnerable. If he decides to come after us—" "He won't," Sarah interrupted, joining them. "He's a coward. He won't risk facing you again." "Maybe," Kale said. "But desperation makes people stupid." He looked at Rhea. "Get some sleep. We move at first light." Rhea nodded and closed her eyes. But sleep didn't come, because in the distance, barely audible over the wind, she heard howls, tracking howls. Gareth hadn't given up. He was hunting them. And when Rhea opened her eyes and met Kale's gaze, she saw he'd heard them too. "How many?" she whispered. Kale's jaw tightened. "Too many." Sarah shifted into wolf form, growling low. The other council members moved to the edge of the camp, forming a perimeter. Kale stood, his body tensing. "They're going to force a confrontation, try to take you back before we reach neutral ground." "What do we do?" Kale's eyes glowed gold in the firelight. "We run," he said, "and if they catch us, we fight." The howls grew closer, and Rhea realized the real battle hadn't even begun. They didn't run. Kale made that decision in the span of a heartbeat, his eyes tracking the howls that grew closer with each passing second. "Running means they control the terrain," he said, voice low and sharp. "We make our stand here." Sarah's wolf form bristled. She let out a questioning whine. "I know it's risky," Kale replied, understanding her without words. "But if we run injured and they're fresh, they'll catch us in open ground. Here we have cover, fire, high ground." He looked at Rhea, still bundled near the flames, barely able to move. "And we have something worth protecting." The council members shifted into defensive positions. There were only 7 of them, against however many Gareth had brought. The math wasn't good. Rhea tried to push herself up. "I can fight." "You can barely breathe," Kale cut her off, but his tone wasn't unkind. "This isn't your battle. Not anymore." "They're coming for me." "They're coming for what you represent," Kale corrected. "A challenge to their power. That makes it everyone's battle." The howls stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the noise. Kale's body went rigid. "They're here." Shapes emerged from the darkness beyond the firelight. Wolves. Dozens of them, moving with coordinated precision. They formed a wide semicircle around the camp, cutting off every escape route. Then Gareth stepped forward, still in human form. He wasn't alone. 3 other men flanked him, his lieutenants, all of them massive and scarred from years of fighting. "Kale Draven," Gareth called out, his voice carrying across the snow. "I'm not here to fight you." "Could have fooled me," Kale replied, not moving from his position. "You brought an army." "Insurance." Gareth's smile was cold. "I'm here to reclaim what's mine." "Rhea isn't property. She's a member of my pack. Pack law says I have jurisdiction over her until she's formally released or transferred." "She beat you in a sanctioned challenge," Kale said. "That releases her from your authority." "The challenge was compromised," Gareth countered. "You interfered, changed the rules mid-fight. By ancient law, that invalidates the outcome." Kyle's jaw tightened. "You're reaching." "Am I?" Gareth gestured to his wolves. "I have 40 witnesses who'll testify that you threatened me, coerced me into accepting terms I never agreed to. That's grounds for nullification." "You're lying. Prove it." Gareth's smile widened. "Oh, wait, you can't. Because you acted outside legal channels. You invoked the right of judgment without proper council oversight, without documentation, without witnesses from neutral packs." Rhea's stomach dropped. He was right. Kyle had acted on impulse, trying to protect her. But that impulsiveness had created a legal gray area Gareth could exploit. "So here's my offer," Gareth continued. "Give me the girl. I'll overlook your overreach. We'll call it a misunderstanding and go our separate ways. And if I refuse," Gareth's expression hardened, "then I invoke the right of reclamation. You took a pack member without proper transfer protocols. That's theft. And theft of pack members is grounds for war." The word hung in the frozen air like a blade. War between packs was rare. brutal. It could destabilize entire territories, drag in allied packs, leave hundreds dead, all for one person. Kale didn't flinch. You'd risk war over a woman you tried to kill? I'd risk war over the principle, Gareth shot back. You can't just walk into another alpha's territory and steal his people because you don't like how he runs things. That's chaos. That's the end of pack law entirely. He's not wrong, one of Kyle's council members murmured, a lean man with copper-colored hair. Legally, this is murky. Whose side are you on, Marcus? Sarah growled. Truth's side, Marcus replied, which is that Kyle acted without following procedure. That gives Gareth leverage. Kale's hands clenched into fists. So what do you suggest? I hand her over? Let him drag her back to that death trap? I suggest we negotiate, Marcus said carefully. Find a compromise that doesn't start a war. There is no compromise, Rhea said. Everyone turned to look at her. She was sitting up now, despite the pain, despite the medication making her thoughts fuzzy. Her voice was weak but steady. There's no compromise because this isn't about pack law or jurisdiction, she continued. It's about power. He wants to make an example out of me, show everyone what happens when you challenge an alpha. Smart girl, Gareth said, his tone almost admiring. You're finally learning how the world works. No, Rhea said. I'm learning how your world works, and it's broken. Gareth's smile faded. Careful. Or what? You'll kill me? Rhea pushed herself to her feet, ignoring Sarah's protest. You already tried that. I'm still here. She took a step toward Gareth, then another. Each movement sent pain lancing through her ribs, but she didn't stop. You left me in a cabin to freeze, cut off my supplies, told everyone I was too weak to matter. And when I survived anyway, when I saved 15 lives you would have let die, you couldn't handle it. You disobeyed? I lived, Rhea interrupted. That's my crime. I refused to die quietly. She was close enough now to see the fury in Gareth's eyes. So here's my offer, she said. You let me go, right now. You release me from the pack publicly, in front of all these witnesses. And in exchange, I won't tell the High Council what really happened. Gareth laughed. You think they'd believe you? I think they'd believe him. Rhea pointed at Kyle, the Alpha King, and his entire council, all of whom saw what you did, how you live. That's hearsay. It's testimony, Kyle interjected, from the highest-ranking wolves in the territory, against one minor alpha with a history of complaint. Gareth went still. What complaints? Did you think I came to Blackridge by accident? Kyle asked. I was investigating reports of abuse, neglect, suspicious deaths. Your pack has been on the council's radar for 2 years. The blood drained from Gareth's face. Rhea's case is just the clearest example, Kyle continued. But there are others. The Omega, who disappeared last winter. The Elder, who died of natural causes despite being in perfect health. The 3 juveniles who were exiled for insubordination. You can't prove any of that. I can now. Kale gestured to Rhea. She's living proof of your methods, and when we bring her before the council, they won't just investigate you. They'll tear your entire operation apart. Gareth's hands shook with rage. This is blackmail. This is justice, Kyle corrected. You let her go peacefully, or I drag you to the capital in chains and let the council decide your fate. Choose. For a long moment, Gareth said nothing. His wolves watched, waiting for orders. The tension was so thick Rhea could barely breathe. Then Gareth smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Fine, he said. She's released, effective immediately. I want nothing more to do with her. Relief flooded through Rhea so intensely her knees almost buckled. But, Gareth continued, when this blows up in your face, when she proves to be exactly as weak and useless as I always said, don't come crying to me. He turned to leave, then paused. And Kyle, you just made an enemy. Remember that. Then he shifted, bones cracking, fur sprouting, and disappeared into the darkness. His pack followed, melting into the forest like shadows. Within seconds, they were gone. Rhea's legs gave out. Sarah caught her before she hit the ground. Easy, Sarah murmured. You're okay. It's over. But it wasn't over. Not really. Because as Rhea looked up at Kyle's grim expression, she realized this was just the beginning. They reached the capital 2 days later. Rhea had expected a city, What she got was something between a fortress and a small nation. The capital, officially called White Peak but known to everyone as the Crown City, sprawled across a mountain valley like a sleeping giant. Stone walls 30 feet high surrounded the inner districts. Watchtowers bristled with guards, and at the center, rising above everything else, stood the Hall of Alphas. It was massive, ancient, built from white stone that seemed to glow in the sunlight. That's where the High Council meets, Kyle explained as they approached. He'd shifted back to human form, wearing travel-worn clothes that somehow still looked regal on him. 10 alphas from the major territories. They make all the big decisions. Law, war, justice. And they'll listen to me? Rhea asked. She was still being carried by Sarah, still too injured to walk far. They'll listen to me, Kale corrected. You just have to tell the truth. What if the truth isn't enough? Kale met her eyes. Then we make it enough. They passed through the gates without challenge. Kale's presence alone was enough to make guards snap to attention. Inside, the city was a maze of cobblestone streets and timber buildings. Wolves in human form moved through the crowds, some in fine clothes, others in working gear. Everyone stared at their group. At Kyle, obviously, but also at Rhea. Word had already spread. She could see it in their faces. Curiosity, suspicion, judgment. The weak wolf who saved the Alpha King. Some looked at her with admiration, others with contempt. She tried not to care. They were brought to a compound near the Hall of Alphas, Kael's personal residence when he was in the capital. It was huge, luxurious, completely overwhelming. A healer was summoned immediately. An older woman named Mara, who clucked disapprovingly at Rhea's injuries and spent an hour resetting bones and applying poultices that smelled like pine and something bitter. You're lucky, Mara said as she worked. Another day and some of these breaks would have healed wrong. You'd have been crippled. Can't have that, Rhea muttered. People might think I'm weak. Mara paused, then smiled slightly. People think all kinds of stupid things. Doesn't make them true. After the healing session, Sarah helped Rhea to a guest room that was bigger than the entire cabin she'd lived in. There was an actual bed, with blankets, and pillows that didn't smell like mildew. Rhea stood in the doorway, staring. You okay? Sarah asked. I don't belong here, Rhea said quietly. Neither did I when I first arrived. Sarah guided her inside. Kyle found me in a ditch, half dead, after my pack abandoned me for being infertile. Told me I was useless, a waste of resources. Rhea looked at her in surprise. But you're on his council. Because he doesn't measure worth the way other alphas do. Sarah helped Rhea sit on the bed. Strength isn't just fighting. It's surviving, adapting, refusing to quit when everything says you should. That sounds like something he told you to say. Sarah grinned. He did, but it's still true. She headed for the door, then paused. The council meets tomorrow. Get some rest. You're going to need it. Rhea didn't sleep. She tried. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Gareth's face, heard his words. When she proves to be exactly as weak and useless as I always said. What if he was right? What if she'd just gotten lucky? What if the council saw through her, saw the truth, that she was just a broken wolf who couldn't even shift properly, who'd stumbled into something way over her head? She sat by the window watching the city below. Lights flickered in windows. Wolves moved through the streets even at this late hour. A knock at the door startled her. Come in, she called. Kyle entered, carrying 2 cups of something that smelled like herbs and honey. Thought you might be awake, he said, handing her one. Can't sleep, Rhea admitted. Nervous about tomorrow? Terrified. Kale sat in the chair across from her. Good. Fear means you understand what's at stake. That's not comforting. It's not supposed to be. He took a sip from his cup. But for what it's worth, I've seen warriors twice your size crumble under less pressure. You held your ground. That counts. I got lucky. Luck is what you make of it. Kyle leaned forward. Tomorrow, the council is going to try to intimidate you. They're going to question everything. Your motives, your story, your credibility. Some of them are friends with Gareth. Others just don't like change. So why are we even doing this? Because systems don't change on their own, Kale said. Someone has to push. Someone has to stand up and say, this is wrong, even when it's easier to stay quiet. He met her eyes. You did that when you saved us. You stood up when you challenged Gareth. Tomorrow, you just have to do it one more time. What if they don't listen? Then we make them listen. Kyle's expression hardened. I didn't bring you here to fail. I brought you here to win. Rhea stared into her cup, watching steam curl up from the surface. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why do you care? She looked up at him. You're the Alpha King. You could have just thanked me and moved on, but you didn't. You put yourself at risk. Your position. Why? Kale was quiet for a long moment. Because I was you once, he said finally. Different circumstances, different pack. But the same thing, discarded, underestimated, told I'd never amount to anything. What happened? Someone gave me a chance. Kale's eyes were distant. An old alpha named Rowan. He saw past what I couldn't do and focused on what I could. Trained me. Believed in me when no one else did. And you became Alpha King. And he died protecting me from a challenge he knew I wasn't ready for. Kale's voice went flat. I've spent 20 years trying to honor that sacrifice. Trying to be the kind of leader he was. The kind who sees potential instead of limitations. He looked at Rhea directly. That's why I care. Because nobody should have to fight alone. And because the world needs more people like you. People who choose compassion over convenience. Rhea's throat tightened. I don't think I'm that person. You are, Kale said simply. You just don't see it yet. The Hall of Alphas was even more intimidating on the inside. The main chamber was circular, with a domed ceiling that seemed to stretch up forever. 10 massive stone chairs formed a semicircle at the far end, the seats of the High Council. Each one was carved with symbols representing a different territory. Rhea stood in the center of the room, alone. Kyle had warned her this would happen. Council protocol dictated that accusers stand without support to prevent intimidation. She felt very small. The 10 alphas filed in and took their seats. Rhea recognized Kyle. He sat in the largest chair marked with a crown symbol. The others were strangers. Some looked old, others young. All of them radiated power. A woman with silver hair and sharp features spoke first. State your name and territory. Rhea Ashford, formerly of Blackridge. Formerly? Another alpha asked, a man with a scarred face and cold eyes. Did you renounce your pack? I was released. Why? Rhea took a breath. Because I challenged my alpha's authority. And won. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Explain, the silver-haired woman ordered. So Rhea did. She told them everything. The cabin, the storm, the wolves. Gareth's abandonment, the fight. Kyle's intervention. Some alphas listened with interest. Others looked bored. One was actively scowling. When she finished, the scarred man leaned forward. This is quite a story, Miss Ashford, but it's just that a story. You have no proof. I have witnesses, Rhea said. The Alpha King, his council. They saw what you wanted them to see, another alpha interrupted, a younger man with slicked back hair. You could have staged the whole thing, manipulated the situation to gain sympathy. Why would I do that? Attention? Power. A way out of a pack you didn't like. The young alpha shrugged. Ambition takes many forms. I didn't ask for any of this, Rhea protested. But you benefited from it, the scarred man said. You're here, in the capital, under the Alpha King's protection. That's quite an upgrade from a hunting cabin. That's enough, Victor, Kyle said sharply. Victor smiled coldly. Just asking questions, my king. Isn't that what we're here to do? You're here to deliver justice, Kale replied, not to bully someone half your size. Then let's talk about evidence, the silver-haired woman interjected. Miss Ashford, you claim Alpha Gareth deliberately endangered you. Can you prove intent? Rhea hesitated. The supply run stopped. He refused to see me. Logistical failures aren't proof of malice, Victor cut in. Maybe the runners got lost. Maybe the Alpha was busy. You're asking us to destroy a man's reputation based on your interpretation of events. It's not interpretation, Rhea said, frustration rising. He told me I was weak, disposable. He said mean things? Victor's tone was mocking. And that's grounds for what exactly? Hurt feelings aren't a crime. Several alphas chuckled. Ria's hands clenched into fists. He tried to kill me. In a sanctioned challenge you initiated, Victor countered. A challenge you couldn't possibly win, by the way, since you can't even shift, which raises the question, why challenge him at all unless you were trying to provoke a situation? I was trying to survive. By attacking your alpha? By standing up for myself? Same thing in pack hierarchy. Ria's vision blurred with tears of rage. This wasn't a trial. It was a trap. They'd already decided she was lying, that she was manipulating the situation. She looked at Kyle. He was gripping the arms of his chair so hard the stone was cracking, but he couldn't intervene, not without proving Victor's point, that she was just a puppet, that this whole thing was orchestrated. An older alpha with kind eyes, one who'd been silent until now, spoke up. Miss Ashford, I have a question. Ria turned to him, desperate for anything that wasn't hostility. When you found the wolves dying in the storm, he continued, why did you help them? You said yourself you were starving, low on supplies. Saving them put your own life at greater risk. I don't know, Ria stammered. They were dying. I couldn't just— You could have, the old alpha said gently. Most would have. Self-preservation is a powerful instinct. I know, but it felt wrong. Leaving them felt worse than dying. Why? Ria struggled to find the words. Because I knew what it felt like. To be left behind. To not matter to anyone. And I wouldn't do that to someone else, even if they were strangers. The old alpha nodded slowly. Thank you. He looked at the rest of the council. I've been alpha of Northridge for 40 years. I've seen countless wolves come through those doors with complaints, accusations, demands. Most of them want something: power, territory, revenge. He gestured to Ria. This girl doesn't want anything except to not be left to die. That's it. That's her entire crime. She survived. Eldrick, Victor said warningly, you're being sentimental. I'm being observant, Eldrick countered. Look at her, Victor. Really look. She's terrified, injured. She has no allies here except the king, and she knows we don't trust his judgment because of his personal involvement. He stood, his old bones creaking. But she's still standing, still telling her truth, even though every word she speaks could be used against her. He turned to Ria. That's not manipulation. That's courage. The chamber went quiet. Victor shifted uncomfortably. One member's opinion is worth considering, the silver-haired woman said. She'd been reading something during the exchange, a document one of the attendants had brought in. Especially when it aligns with evidence. She held up the papers. These are supply records from Blackridge, requisition logs for the northern outpost. According to these, no supplies were sent to that location for 6 weeks prior to the storm. Victor frowned. Records can be falsified. Not these, she interrupted. They're sealed documents from the Territorial Oversight Office. Independent verification. She looked at Ria. Someone in Gareth's pack has been documenting irregularities for months. Missing supplies, unexplained resource allocations, and multiple requests for wellness checks on the northern outpost that were ignored. Ria's heart hammered. Who? The documents are anonymous, the woman said, but they're corroborated by 3 separate sources within the pack, all of whom are willing to testify if granted protection. Victor's expression darkened. This is unprecedented. You're allowing anonymous accusations. I'm allowing evidence, the woman corrected. There's a difference. She set the papers down. Alpha Gareth will be summoned for formal questioning. This council will conduct a full investigation into Blackridge Pack operations, including supply management, member welfare, and leadership decisions. And in the meantime, Kyle asked, Miss Ashford is under council protection until the investigation concludes. The woman's gaze softened slightly as she looked at Ria. You did well, child. Speaking truth to power is never easy. Relief crashed over Ria so hard she swayed. It wasn't a complete victory. Gareth wasn't punished yet. The investigation could take months, but it was something. It was proof that she mattered. Victor stood abruptly, his chair scraping against stone. This is a mistake. You're setting a precedent that any pack member can come crying to the council whenever they don't like their alpha's decisions. That's chaos. No, Kael said, standing as well. We're setting a precedent that alphas can't abuse their power without consequences. That's accountability. He looked directly at Victor. unless that's a problem for you. Victor's jaw tightened. Of course not. I simply believe in due process. Then you'll support a thorough investigation. Naturally. But Victor's eyes promised violence as he looked at Rhea one last time before leaving the chamber. The other alphas filed out, some nodding to Rhea, others ignoring her entirely. When only Kyle, Sarah, and Eldrick remained, the old alpha approached Rhea. You have a difficult road ahead, he said kindly. The investigation will take time. Gareth will fight it. And Victor, he trailed off. Victor will be a problem, Kyle finished. He has allies, Eldrick agreed. Alphas who prefer the old ways, who see change as weakness. Then they're fools, Sarah muttered. Eldrick smiled. Perhaps, but they're dangerous fools. He patted Rhea's shoulder. Stay close to the king, and watch your back. After he left, Sarah helped Rhea out of the chamber. Her legs were shaking so badly she could barely walk. You did it, Sarah said quietly. You actually did it. But as they stepped outside into the bright sunlight, Rhea saw a figure watching from across the courtyard. Victor. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, staring at her with cold calculation. Then he turned and walked away. He's going to be trouble, Rhea said. Let him try, Kyle replied, appearing at her other side. He's one alpha. I'm the king, and you... He looked at her with something like pride. You just changed the game. Rhea wanted to believe him, but as they walked through the city streets, she couldn't shake the feeling that Victor wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Still, for now, she'd won. The council had listened, the investigation was happening, and for the first time in her life, Rhea Ashford wasn't invisible. She was seen, and that, she was starting to realize, was the most dangerous thing she could be. The investigation moved slower than Rhea expected and faster than she could handle. Within a week, 3 wolves from Blackridge arrived at the capital under council protection. They were thin, scared, and spoke in whispers even inside the secure compound Kyle had arranged for them. Rhea met them on the 5th day. The first was a young man named Owen, barely 20, with a limp from an injury that had never healed properly. The second was an older woman, Marta, whose eyes carried the weight of too many losses. The third was a teenage girl named Liv, who couldn't stop shaking. They sat in a private room with Sarah present as a neutral witness. No one else. Kyle had insisted on that. These wolves needed to feel safe, not interrogated. Thank you for coming, Rhea said quietly. Owen looked at her like she was something fragile. We heard what you did, standing up to him like that. I didn't do it alone. But you started it. Marta's voice was rough, like she'd spent years not using it. That's more than the rest of us managed. Tell me what happened, Rhea said. Your stories. The council needs to hear them. So they did. Owen talked about his injury, sustained during a hunt Gareth had forced despite dangerous conditions. When Owen couldn't keep up afterward, his rations were cut, his medical care denied. He'd been slowly starving for 8 months. Marta spoke about her daughter, how the girl had questioned one of Gareth's orders, how she disappeared the next day, how Gareth claimed she'd run off, but Marta found her daughter's favorite necklace in the woods, broken and bloodied. He said she was reckless, Marta whispered, that she got herself killed challenging a bear, but my daughter knew those woods better than anyone. She wouldn't have been that stupid. Liv's story was the hardest to hear. She'd been assigned to kitchen duty. One of Gareth's lieutenants had cornered her there. When she'd fought back and reported it, Gareth had called her a liar, punished her for making false accusations. He said I was trying to destroy a good man's reputation, Liv said, tears streaming down her face. He made me apologize in front of the whole pack. And then he gave me to that man as a servant, said I needed to learn respect. Rhea's hands shook with rage. How long? 6 months. Until I ran. Liv looked up, eyes hollow. I've been hiding in neutral territory ever since, living off scraps, too afraid to ask anyone for help. You're safe now, Sarah said firmly. No one's touching you here. Will the council believe us? Owen asked. We're nobody, and he's nothing, Rhea interrupted. Not anymore. You're not nobody. You're survivors, and your voices matter. She meant it, every word. But she also knew the truth. Believing and proving were different things. The formal hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In that time, Rhea learned what it meant to be visible. Wolves stopped her in the streets, some to thank her, others to spit at her feet. She received letters, dozens of them. Half were supportive, the other half were death threats. Kale assigned guards. Rhea hated it. I don't need babysitters, she told him one evening. You need to stay alive, Kyle replied. Victor's been quiet, too quiet. That worries me. You think he'll try something? I think he's waiting for the right moment. Kale poured them both tea, a nightly ritual they'd fallen into. He can't move against you directly without making himself look guilty. But if something happened to you before the hearing, the case falls apart, Rhea finished. Exactly. She stared into her cup. I'm putting everyone at risk, you, Sarah, those 3 wolves who came forward. Maybe I should— Don't. Kale's voice was sharp. Don't you dare say you should quit. People could die because of me. People were already dying because of Gareth. You're just the first one brave enough to do something about it. He leaned forward. This is bigger than you now. This is about changing a system that's been broken for generations. No pressure, Rhea muttered. Kale almost smiled. You've handled worse. You'll handle this. But his confidence didn't stop the nightmares. Every night, Rhea dreamed of the cabin, of the storm, of dying alone while everyone else survived. Only now, in the dreams, she couldn't save the wolves. She dragged them inside and they died anyway, one by one, while she watched helplessly. She woke most mornings drenched in sweat, gasping. Sarah found her like that on the morning of the hearing. Bad dreams? Sarah asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. The same one. Want to talk about it? Rhea shook her head. I just want this to be over. It will be. Today. Sarah squeezed her shoulder. One way or another, it ends today. The hearing chamber was packed, every seat filled. Wolves lined the walls, standing room only. The 10 council alphas sat in their stone chairs, expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Gareth stood on one side of the room, flanked by 2 lawyers and looking supremely confident. Rhea stood on the other side with Owen, Marta, and Liv behind her. No lawyers. Kale had offered, but Rhea refused. She wanted the council to hear the truth unfiltered, not wrapped in legal language. The silver-haired alpha, Rhea had learned her name was Celeste, called the chamber to order. We're here to investigate allegations of abuse, neglect, and corruption within the Blackridge Pack under Alpha Gareth's leadership, Celeste announced. This is a formal inquiry. All testimony will be recorded and considered as evidence. She looked at Rhea. The accusers may present their case first. Rhea stepped forward. Her legs felt like water, but she forced them to hold. Alpha Gareth systematically abused his power, she began. He used food, shelter, and basic care as weapons to control pack members. He isolated anyone who questioned him, and when people disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances, he covered it up. These are serious accusations, Celeste said. Do you have evidence? I have witnesses. Rhea gestured to Owen, who stepped forward nervously. He told his story, the forced hunt, the injury, the starvation. His voice shook, but he didn't stop. When he finished, one of Gareth's lawyers stood. How do we know this injury wasn't your own fault? Perhaps you were simply clumsy. I've hunted since I was 12, Owen said. Never had an accident until Gareth made us go out in a storm. Alleged storm, the lawyer interrupted. Can you prove weather conditions were dangerous? There were other hunters there. They saw— Where are these witnesses? Owen faltered. Some of them are still in the pack. They're too afraid to come forward. The lawyer smiled. So you have no corroborating testimony, just your word against the alphas. But my injury proves you got hurt, not how or why. The lawyer sat down. Next, Owen looked at Rhea, devastated. It's okay, she mouthed. Keep going. Marta went next. She spoke about her daughter with a mother's broken love, describing every detail she remembered. Gareth's lawyer tore into her too. You said your daughter's body was never found? No, but so she could have run away, joined another pack, started a new life somewhere. She wouldn't leave without telling me, Marta insisted. Are you sure? Maybe she wanted to escape. Maybe she didn't tell you because she knew you'd try to stop her. That's not She loved me. She wouldn't, or maybe she's dead. And it was exactly what Alpha Gareth said. An accident. A tragic accident, but not murder. Marta was crying now. The lawyer sat down, satisfied. Ria's hands clenched. This was exactly what Kale had warned her about. The system was designed to protect alphas, not pack members. Then Liv stepped forward. She was the youngest, the most fragile. And when she started speaking, the chamber went dead silent. She told her story with a flatness that was somehow worse than tears, clinical, detached, like she was describing something that happened to someone else. When she finished, Gareth's lawyer didn't stand immediately, because there was no way to make that story sound like anything but what it was. Finally, he rose. These are serious allegations, but again, it's your word against— I have proof, Liv interrupted. The lawyer blinked. What? Liv pulled something from her pocket. A small journal, worn and stained. I wrote everything down. Dates, times, what he did, what Alpha Gareth said when I reported it. Her voice was still flat. I kept it hidden, but I kept it. She handed the journal to Celeste. The Alpha opened it and read. Her expression darkened with each page. This is detailed, Celeste said quietly. I thought if I wrote it down, maybe someday someone would believe me. Liv looked at Gareth directly for the first time. I was right. Gareth's lawyer moved to object, but Celeste held up a hand. This journal will be admitted as evidence. We'll verify the claims within, and if they're substantiated— She looked at Gareth. You'll answer for them. Gareth's confidence finally cracked. This is a setup. That girl is lying. Careful, Kale said from his seat. Calling a victim a liar before the evidence is examined doesn't look good. Gareth's jaw worked. He turned to his lawyers, who whispered frantically among themselves. Celeste set the journal aside. Are there any other witnesses? Yes, a voice called from the back of the chamber. Everyone turned. A man pushed through the crowd. He was middle-aged, scarred, with the bearing of a warrior. My name is Dane, he said. I was Gareth's second-in-command for 10 years. Gareth went white. Dane, don't— I kept quiet because I was afraid, Dane continued, ignoring him. Afraid of what he'd do to me, to my family. But after hearing these people's stories, I realize I'm just as guilty as he is. I stood by and watched. He approached the council. I can verify everything they've said. The hunts in dangerous conditions, the cut rations, the disappearances. I have records, names, dates. He pulled out a folder thick with documents and handed it to Celeste. I also have something else, Dane said. Proof that Gareth falsified supply reports to the Territorial Oversight Office. He claimed he was sending resources to the Northern Outpost when he wasn't. He pocketed the difference. Gasps rippled through the chamber. That's embezzlement, Victor said, speaking for the first time. Even he sounded shocked. Celeste was reading through the documents, her expression growing colder by the second. These are sealed requisition forms, she said, with Gareth's signature, showing supplies allocated to the Northern Outpost that never arrived. She looked up. That's not just abuse. That's theft from the territorial coffers, a crime against the entire council. Gareth stood abruptly. I can explain. Sit down, Celeste ordered. The command in her voice was absolute. Gareth sat. For the first time, he looked small. Celeste conferred with the other council members in hushed tones. Ria couldn't hear what they were saying, but she saw their expressions: anger, disgust, resolution. Finally, Celeste stood. After reviewing the evidence presented, she announced, this council finds sufficient cause to strip Alpha Gareth of his rank and authority, effective immediately. The chamber erupted. Gareth shot to his feet. You can't— This is— Furthermore, Celeste continued, raising her voice over the chaos, Gareth will face criminal charges for embezzlement, abuse of power, and accessory to assault. He will remain in council custody pending trial. Guards moved in, flanking Gareth. He looked around wildly, searching for allies, found none. This isn't over, he snarled, looking directly at Ria. You think you've won? You've just made yourself a target. Every alpha who doesn't want their pack questioned will come for you. Let them, Ria said. Gareth was led away, still shouting threats. The chamber slowly quieted. Celeste looked at Ria. You showed great courage coming forward. The council thanks you. What happens to Blackridge now? Ria asked. The pack will be placed under council supervision until a new alpha can be appointed, one who understands that leadership is service, not dominance. She paused. Would you be interested in the position? The question hit Rhea like a physical blow. Me? She managed. I can't. I'm not. You're not traditional, Celeste agreed, but you care about your people. You fought for them when it cost you everything. That's what a true alpha does. Rhea looked at Kyle. He nodded slightly, encouraging, but Rhea knew the truth. I can't even shift properly. Half the pack would never accept me. Then we'll find someone else, Celeste said. But the offer stands. Think about it. The hearing adjourned. As the crowd dispersed, wolves approached Rhea, some to congratulate her, others to simply touch her arm, as if confirming she was real. Owen, Marta, and Liv stood together, crying and holding each other. Dane approached Rhea, his expression solemn. I should have done this years ago. I'm sorry. You did it now, Rhea said. That's what matters. What will you do? He asked. After this? Rhea had no idea. For weeks, her entire focus had been this moment. She hadn't thought past it. I don't know, she admitted. Kyle appeared at her side. Walk with me? They left the Hall of Alphas and walked through the city as the sun set. The streets were busy with evening crowds, but people made way for Kale instinctively. You did it, Kale said after a while. You changed things. Dane changed things. Liv's journal changed things. You gave them the courage to come forward, Kale corrected. Don't diminish that. They reached a quiet park overlooking the valley. The view was stunning, mountains in the distance, the city spreading out below, lights beginning to twinkle in windows. What happens now? Rhea asked. Now you decide who you want to be, Kyle said. You could go back to Black Ridge as Alpha. You could stay here and work with the council on reform. You could do literally anything. That's terrifying. Freedom usually is. Kyle turned to face her. For what it's worth, I hope you stay. The council needs people like you, people who understand what it's like to be powerless. I'm not ready to lead anything. No one ever is. You just learn as you go. Rhea was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked the question that had been burning in her chest for weeks. Why did you really help me? And don't say it's because I saved you. You would have survived that storm with or without me. Kale smiled slightly. Maybe, maybe not. He looked out at the valley. You want the truth? I helped you because you reminded me that power should be used to protect people, not control them. I'd forgotten that. Started making compromises, playing politics, letting things slide because fighting every battle was exhausting. He met her eyes. Then I watched you drag 15 dying wolves into a cabin while you were dying yourself. And I remembered what it was supposed to be about. I just did what anyone would do. No, Kyle said. You did what anyone should do. There's a difference. Rhea's throat tightened. I still don't know what I'm doing. Good. That means you won't get arrogant. Kyle held out his hand. Stay. Work with me. Help build something better. Rhea looked at his hand, at the city below, at the future spreading out before her like uncharted territory. She'd spent her whole life being told she was too weak to matter. Now she was being asked to help lead. It was insane. It was impossible. It was exactly what she'd been fighting for all along. The chance to matter. To make a difference. To prove that strength came in forms people didn't always recognize. She took his hand. Okay, but I'm going to need help. You'll have it, Kyle promised. Whatever you need. 6 months later, Rhea stood in front of the council again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her stood 20 wolves, former pack members who'd come forward with stories of abuse from other territories. The council's investigation hadn't stopped with Gareth. It had spread, exposing corruption across multiple packs. Some alphas had been stripped of rank. Others had stepped down voluntarily. A few had fled rather than face judgment. The system was changing, slowly, painfully, but changing. Rhea had become the face of that change, whether she wanted to be or not. She'd helped draft new oversight protocols, worked with the council to establish protection for whistleblowers, created support networks for wolves escaping abusive packs, and somehow, impossibly, she'd become good at it. Not perfect. She still doubted herself constantly, still woke up with nightmares, still felt like an imposter most days. but she showed up anyway. Today she was presenting a proposal, a reform package that would fundamentally change how alphas were selected and monitored. It was ambitious, controversial. Half the council hated it, but she was going to fight for it anyway. The current system, she began, her voice steady, allows alphas to operate with almost no accountability. We've seen the results: abuse, corruption, deaths that could have been prevented. She gestured to the wolves behind her. These people deserve better. Every pack member deserves better. Victor, who still sat on the council despite his obvious hostility, leaned forward. What you're proposing would undermine alpha authority, make them powerless. No, Rhea corrected. It would make them accountable. There's a difference. Is there? Because it sounds like you want to turn alphas into administrators. Remove the strength that keeps packs safe. Strength isn't dominance, Rhea said. It's responsibility. And if an alpha can't handle being questioned, they shouldn't be leading. Victor's eyes narrowed. Easy to say when you've never had to make the hard choices, when you've never had to sacrifice one to save many. You're right, Rhea agreed. I haven't been alpha, but I've been the one who gets sacrificed. And I can tell you, most of the time, it's not necessary. It's just convenient. The chamber went quiet. Celeste, who'd become one of Rhea's strongest allies, spoke up. I move to bring this proposal to a vote. Seconded, Eldrick said immediately. The vote was close. 5 in favor, 4 against, 1 abstention. But it passed. When Celeste announced the results, the wolves behind Rhea erupted in cheers. Victor stood and left without a word, his face dark with anger. Rhea knew she'd made another enemy, probably several, but she'd also made progress, and that was enough. That evening, there was a celebration. Nothing formal, just Rhea, Kyle, Sarah, and a few others gathering in Kyle's private quarters with food and wine. To Rhea, Sarah toasted, raising her glass. The most stubborn wolf I've ever met. I'll drink to that, Kyle agreed. They ate and talked late into the night. At some point, the conversation turned to the future. What's next? Sarah asked Rhea. You've reformed the oversight system. What's left? Everything, Rhea said. This is just the beginning. There are still packs operating in the old ways, still wolves suffering in silence, still work to do. You can't save everyone, Kyle said gently. No, but I can try to build a system where they can save themselves. Later, after everyone had left and Rhea was heading back to her own quarters, Kyle stopped her. I have something for you, he said. He handed her a small wooden box. Inside was a silver pendant shaped like a wolf with its head held high. It belonged to Rowan, Kale explained, the alpha who gave me a chance. He used to say it represented what we should all aspire to be. Strong, yes, but also proud of who we are, not what others expect us to be. Rhea's eyes stung. I can't take this. You can, and you should. Kale closed her fingers around the box. Because you've done what Rowan always hoped someone would. You've proven that strength and compassion aren't opposites. They're the same thing. Rhea didn't trust herself to speak. She just nodded. That night, alone in her room, she stood by the window wearing the pendant. 6 months ago, she'd been dying in a cabin, abandoned and forgotten. Now she was helping reshape the future of every pack in the territory. It was impossible. It was real. And as Rhea looked out at the city, at the lights, the life, the possibilities, she realized something. She'd spent so long trying to prove she wasn't weak, but weakness had never been her problem. Her problem had been believing them when they said she didn't matter. Now she knew different. She mattered because she chose to, because she showed up, because she refused to let the system stay broken just because it was easier than fighting. That was her strength. Not claws or fangs or the ability to shift, just the stubborn, relentless refusal to quit. Somewhere in the night, a wolf howled. Rhea closed her eyes and howled back, her voice joining the chorus, adding to it, becoming part of something larger than herself. She belonged, not because someone gave her permission, but because she'd claimed her place and refused to let anyone take it away. From outcast to queen, not in title, not in power, but in the way that mattered most, she'd transformed not just herself, but the world around her. And that was a victory no one could ever strip away.